So hi, this is Richard and Craig with our week 2 feedback video. And lots of activity this week, Craig. We've got 24,000 people enrolled in this course, which is just awesome. And we've had about 19,000 comments already, so there's still a really great amount of sharing and people really engaging with the exercises and different activities.
And plenty happening on the study groups as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Lots of great supporting one another and really deepening the learning. Remember that they're an optional adjunct, so there's sort of an optional part of the course. You don't have to do them, but if you sort of like learning in a smaller group and that kind of thing, that can be really helpful. Yeah. We've also got some suggested time frames for the study group, so just wanting to keep them on track. So, you know, if your group's moving at a faster pace, that's fine, but, you know, you might want to just sort of slow it down a little and just follow each week.
And the moderators are mainly through the main feed, more than the study group.
Yeah.
So if you want to get the feedback from Jen and Sherelle, that'll be mainly through the main feed.
Yeah. And Craig, lots of people this week noticing default mode.
Yeah. It's really encouraging to see this as a sign of progress, to be aware of how distractible the mind is. The thing is, in practicing not getting frustrated and angry about that. And even if we do get frustrated and angry about it, then just noticing that too. But it really, it starts to make it very apparent for us. One of the things I think is interesting, if we just watch the default mode, we tend to notice that it's circular, it's repetitive, it goes over the same thing, worrying about this, worrying about that. I can remember one time a lady was doing a course, an anxiety program. I was running stress and anxiety. And she said, you know, over the week, she sort of watched this sort of tendency to worry and catastrophize more and more. And she said, it was on the final week of the course, she said, just over the last week or two, I just really lost interest in it. Just the tendency of the mind to do this. And she said on the final week, I think I've bored myself out of anxiety.
Just like an old TV show on rerun, you just eventually just get over it.
Yeah, that's right. And if we can just lose interest in it, and in particular just gain more interest in the life that we're actually living outside of our head, then it makes the default mode a lot easier to deal with.
A lot of people as well noticing that they were feeling very anxious when they started to meditate on the breath this week. And that's a very common experience. The moment we bring our awareness to our breath, it does naturally start to change it in some way sometimes. And people very often start to evaluate and wonder if they're breathing properly or breathing enough. And then all these habits of control come in. So that of course, is a very, very common experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
It tends not to persist, especially if we can notice that tendency to control the breathing or just that slight tension around the breathing without getting anxious about that, but just to sort of notice that and just let that little wave of tension come and go.
Yes.
If we sort of get anxious about the anxiety or the tension, then we can sort of escalate it rather than just learning to observe it. And just it's a thing that we're curious about, that we're just noticing.
Yeah. I think curiosity is really the key, that we become curious about, you know, if the breath does change, how's it changing? And if we are controlling it in some way, to notice that and then just to let go of the control and the evaluation, the judgment, because as well as learning to be focused and present with mindfulness and with meditation, we're also learning to notice the habits of mind. And if you might have started to notice already that our minds love to control everything. We love to think about everything, and we have a great deal of difficulty just letting things happen naturally.
That's right. And all those habits of mind will become more apparent to us through mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
I'll just briefly mention as well the ADEPT model. I've been teaching medical students for a long time, and my experience is you can't teach medical students anything unless it's based on an acronym. So it's all about the acronyms, but the adept at changing habits, attention, decision, effort, perseverance, and tolerance to discomfort. And it can pretty much apply to any habit that we're trying to work on, but certainly the habitual tendency to go into default mode or to get reactive or judgmental, it's equally applicable to all of that. Yeah. In terms of stress reduction, too, not a lot to say about this, apart from the fact that mindfulness will make us more aware of that, and that can be, I suppose, a little bit disconcerting to some extent. But if we get into the attitude of noticing it in a mindful way, it's just like the noticing, the interest without all of the other comment and the overlay of judging and criticising. So that sort of impartiality that sort of equanimity kind of attitude that we've developed with mindfulness helps enormously in being able to observe the stress.
And as always, just noticing it is the important first step, because quite often this stuff's just happening outside of awareness.
Yes.
We're creating stress for ourselves through patterns of thinking without any real awareness that we're doing that, and then mindfulness shows us, oh, hang on, maybe I've got some say in this, which is, of course, very empowering.
And habit flourishes in a low level of awareness, automatic pilot. That's where habit flourishes. That's where we live pretty much a life of habit. There's people are saying some things about being addicted to the stress response.
Yeah, a lot of our learners were saying they feel very attached or addicted to the stress response. And I think there are probably a lot of reasons why that might be the case. I mean, sometimes the adrenaline rush that we get from being stressed and anxious can, in some perverse way, be rather addictive. And also, of course, sometimes what people are calling stress in these situations is actually excitement or engagement or just being interested.
If somebody says, I'm enjoying the stress response, I'm enjoying the stress, well, if there's enjoyment, then it's not really stress.
It's probably not actually stress, that's right. Yeah.
So that's more about the person, the challenge has lifted the person to really engage with the work in front of them or the deadline.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what they're really enjoying is being mindful, perhaps more than stress.
Perhaps that's what it is.
Being awake and alert. I sometimes make a distinction between be alert, not alarmed. And I think the alertness is more about the mindfulness, that being alarmed is more about stress.
Yeah. Some of our learners did, though, talk about being sort of attached to catastrophizing and certain patterns of anxious thinking. And that's sort of interesting, isn't it? Our brains are, amongst other things, sort of meaning-making machines and survival tools, and so we do often attach ourselves to these types of thinking where we maybe think we're preparing ourselves for danger or for problems in the future, but really we're quite often just trying to control and predict things, and actually life is often not as in control as we might like to think it is. And with mindfulness, we practice letting go of some of that and actually just resting more in the present moment, rather than trying to understand everything and work everything out and control everything.
Yeah. If we step into a situation, step into a day, with an assumption that it's got to be like this and it can't go like that, then what we do is we create an enormous potential for stress and anxiety, rather than being able to enter into a situation saying, oh, well, this is what we're walking towards, and then, do what we need to do, but to actually just be open to the unpredictability of life, to be realising that every moment, the next moment is unknown. We never know what's around the corner. And
if we can do that, of course, there's no stress, is there? We're just resting in the moment. We're not feeling fearful or anxious. We're just, it's very good.
Yeah. So, and when the present moment is stressful, well, I suppose it depends what we mean. Assuming a present moment is stressful, like something could be happening, whether or not it's stressful depends on the way that we see the event. So we could be in a situation and see it as stressful and threatening, or just see it as something that's there in front of us to deal with. Now, mind you, the footage, for example, of Mick Fanning, the Australian surfer, on a surfing final in the World Tour, and up comes a 4-metre shark while he's waiting for the first wave of the final, and he activated the fight or flight response. Well, pretty good.
Very appropriately, I think, in that situation, right? He literally punched the shark and paddled away, so that's fight and flight right there.
That's right, he got them both in a short space of time. That's an appropriate response to get out of a clearly perceived threatening situation. But so many of the situations that we're in, we assume that they have to be stressful. Doing an exam has to be stressful. Playing in a final of a Grand Slam has to be stressful. Well, no, it doesn't actually. That the stress is what we import to the situation.
You watch Federer, he doesn't look particularly stressed out there on the court, does he?
No.
And there are the other famous examples as well, like Viktor Frankl, a famous Jewish psychiatrist who survived the internment camps in World War II, and he realised that he had a choice, even in that terrible environment. He really had a choice about whether he perceived that as stress and really lost himself, or whether he maintained his sense of dignity and stayed connected to his values
and search for meaning in a situation like that. So to take that adversity and to turn it into something really quite extraordinary. So whether he really learned something from that and it set a direction, that insight for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Now, curiosity's been a big theme that's come up this week.
Yeah, it's a central part of mindfulness, being curious. And so actually a lot of parents and grandparents and teachers noted that kids that they're aware of, that they work with, are naturally curious. And as children, we are naturally curious. It's an innate quality that just gets covered over by distraction, by taking things for granted, by relating to the world through concepts and ideas, autopiloting. But of course, it's something that we can rediscover in any moment. And that's really the value of cultivating curiosity,
Yes.
both in meditation and then in everyday life.
Yes, some learners were commenting on, well, being curious about the breath or being curious about in the meditation practice itself, being quite difficult. But the curiosity, yes, we can be curious about the breath and just noticing what's happening to that as it changes and modulates itself. But what we can equally be curious about is also noticing the mind's tendency for boredom or reactivity or judging or commenting and so on, is to notice the patterns of mind that we get into. So being curious, if we want to understand ourselves, if we want to know ourselves better, we've got to get better at observing. And by that, I guess, we're saying observing the mind, observing the body, that's self-awareness. So curiosity is a lot more than just thinking, oh, well, I've got to pay attention. Every breath is different, but also every moment of the mind's reactions and attitudes are different as well.
We just fail to notice that, and that sort of makes it boring for us. But we can cultivate that in any moment. And of course, it's easy with things like travel or, when something's new, it's very easy to be curious about it. But it's really the ability to do that with the mundane, everyday things that really helps us to experience the world in a fresh way and to be present. It's really very central to mindfulness.
If an anthropologist wants to understand another culture, for example, they sit there and they observe the culture as it goes about doing that. I suppose we're becoming observers of ourselves. I was thinking, what would the Latin be for that? A suiologist or something? Learning to study ourselves. So
a lot of our learners also, through being more curious and through starting to notice habits of mind, becoming very aware of self-criticism and the effect that that's having. And finding it hard to let that go and noticing how just pervasive and entrenched that habit of self-criticism can be sometimes.
Yes, and it's a form of default mode. And one of the things that we can be noticing is that it tends to always distort, exaggerate the faults and ignore everything else. So it's like a distortion of perception that happens.
We end up focusing on the faults, and they loom larger than life, and we maybe fail to notice the things that are going well.
And just rather than just noticing, and just because we're mindful doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes, but when we notice them in a mindful way, there's an opportunity for more perspective, and we can learn more from it, have more insight than when we engage in that distorting internal dialogue about it.
Yes. And of course, again, noticing that that's happening is the first step, and then cultivating the ability either just to let go of self-criticism and judgment and arrive back in the present, or even just to be a bit gentler with ourselves.
Yeah.
Be kinder to ourselves.
Yes. This sort of, can we get too gentle, too relaxed, not notice? You got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's very important to differentiate self-compassion from things like self-pity and self-indulgence. And with self-compassion, there's an element of being very present, whereas with self-pity, self-indulgence, we're kind of lost in our thoughts or judgments or lost in the mind. And so when we're actually in the present moment and relating to ourselves and others with compassion and friendliness, that's really what we're talking about.
Yes. Yes, so I think we should distinguish perhaps between that kind of relaxed, which is apathetic, like noticing something but not actually responding to what we're noticing, compared to that sort of objective appraisal, that discernment, perhaps is a better word for it, that comes with being mindful and noticing, oh, that didn't go well, or reacted in that way, and it had an unhelpful effect, and just to learn something from that.
Yes. And a lot of our learners noticed that as they cultivated this quality with themselves, that naturally started to shape how they interacted with others.
Yeah.
So, it begins with us, but then ripples out to everybody and ultimately to sort of
And perhaps
society.
related to this thing too of being less attached. Some people assume, well, if I'm less attached to let go of all my values, I sort of like become totally apathetic about things. And it's interesting to notice, somebody like a Mahatma Gandhi, for example, or somebody like a Nelson Mandela, like some extraordinary people, Aung San Suu Kyi, these people practice meditation, they practice non-attachment, and yet they have this incredible strength and resilience. And
they're anything but devoid of values.
that's right. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, what I actually think is it helps them to clarify their values, to be clear and consistent to their values, unless they find that perhaps their values are wrong, in which case they're able to let them go and refine
Rather
their
than
values.
just being reactive or caught up in their distractions.
Yeah, and I think what happens when we get so caught up in our values and so, in one way, passionate about them, is we often start to distort them and distort other people. And sometimes that can lead to a lot of anger and hostility and create division rather than unity. And there's a lovely line, there's so many quotable lines from Shakespeare, but can I quote one?
Sure.
I won't bore our learners too much, but when valour preys on reason, it eats the sword it fights with. And when this sort of emotional content sort of loses touch with discernment and so on, then we can be very passionate about our values, but sometimes do great harm. And so I think mindfulness helps us to sort of get that balance much better.
Yes. So some fantastic stuff coming up. So please keep engaging with, keep doing the exercises. Please keep having the conversations and supporting one another. And we really look forward to reading your comments over the next week.
Yeah, fantastic.